Hi everyone, I'm Kim Fleming from Shopify. I'm currently a recruiter on our talent acquisition team. So today we're going to go through some of the tips and tricks that I've learned over the last year here at Shopify on how to hire the best technical talent for your web design and development business. So awesome. The first thing that we do when we sit down to think about expanding our business is this even the right time? So there's a couple of things that you need to think about when diving into building out your business. So start by building a roadmap. Are there specialty skills that you're looking for in terms of growth? Do you need to expand because of bandwidth? Does your current team not have enough time or resources to tackle everything that you want to at the moment? So map that out. If you have a special project that you're working on or want to ship by the end of the year, break that down into quarters. And for each quarter, if there's something specific that you need to build, say it needs a lot of design focus, well, maybe that's the time to add a new designer ahead of that upcoming quarter so that you can get all of that done. Now, it's also important to set aside a lot of time to run a full recruitment process. This is not something that I suggest you do running off the side of your desk. Really take the time to find quality individuals because in the long run, it will help the success of your business. And time that you skip at the beginning could be lost time at the end, losing out on that employee, whether they leave to move on to other opportunities or it just doesn't work out skills-wise. And finally, of course, you're going to want to track that progress. So I like to break it down into quarters, as I said before, and nearing the end of each quarter, take a look at all the work that you've done and look ahead to what's coming up. Do you need to adjust your headcount number? Do you need to add another person? Can you wait until the next quarter? And then also keep in mind on how much effort you've put in on the recruitment front, interviewing, sourcing, and even just the hiring process, and decide if that's something that fits into your next quarter. Typically for smaller size teams, this stage is going to be really crucial to you. You want to set aside this time to get together with all the stakeholders. So that being people involved in the interview process, people involved on the team that's doing a specific project or a particular build out. And decide if you do have that bandwidth and decide on whether or not the folks on your team can currently take on these challenges in your next time period, or do you need someone else to join you? And then my favorite part. So what is the actual scope of this role? So you've sat down, you've mapped out your entire year, you've mapped out all your quarters, but now it's getting into the nitty-gritty of what that actual role looks like. And whether that be a role that you've already filled, meaning someone on your team right now is currently doing that role, or whether this is completely new. And so what we do is called an intake meeting. And essentially these are just multi-purpose meetings that help you, number one, build out a job description. Number two, really educate all the internal stakeholders who are going to be involved in this interview process. And then the third thing is just to get everyone on the same page and start this thing off in an organized manner. So what's an intake meeting? As I mentioned, this is an opportunity to build out a job description. So you want to get in a room with everyone involved and start thinking about how you want to sell this opportunity. So I kind of like to think of the first thing that you should talk about is that elevator pitch. So how are you going to bring this opportunity to other people and convince them to want to solve the problems that your organization is working on? So what's the role in a few sentences? If you were to meet up with someone over coffee, what would be the first few things that you would touch on that would sell this person on the opportunity to work with you? And so I also like to continue on and sort of talk about what's the current team structure. Really put yourself in the mind of a candidate and start thinking about the questions that they would ask you when coming forward and speaking about a new opportunity. So where does this new hire fit on your current team? And what are those can't live without skills that this person needs to have in order to be successful in the role? And then you can even go one step further and talk about those nice to have skills that may set aside top candidates versus those that can just get through the job. And then finally, something that's not necessarily pertinent to all businesses, but if you have a particular culture or values alignment that your team or your organization likes to work with, maybe start thinking about those specific attitudes and behaviors that work really well in your team and the things that people need to exhibit to make them successful. So I like to think about that as their level of impact or the impact that they've made in companies before. So talking about their specific experiences, what kind of projects they've worked on, were they the leader of those projects, what type of impact have they had, because they're likely to continue that pattern of behavior in their next opportunity. And so then you can start thinking about further things like the job posting question. I put this up here because if you're putting up a general software developer role, or let's say a front-end developer role, you're going to get a lot of applicants likely. And so you want to help yourself out during that screening process by adding a custom question to the bottom of your job description that gives people a little taste of what they could be working on when they work for you. So you can do something as simple as give me an example of certain lines of code that you've done, or show me a little bit of your design portfolio as attached to your resume or CV, something that just allows people to do an extra step. You'd be surprised as to how many people just submit resumes without reading full job descriptions. And so if you're looking for people with attention to detail, sneak those questions in there. The other thing that candidates most often come to you with is the biggest challenges or exciting things that your team is working on. And so this comes really key, especially when you start interviewing. So start thinking about these now in the intake meeting. And your internal stakeholders are going to be able to provide a lot of information on these and the ones who are getting into the nitty-gritty of what you're working on. So this sort of is like your selling point. And it's sort of a way to get people really excited to want to talk to you. And then the fourth thing I have here is level of impact and compensation range. And so this is really key when you're starting to think about the hire, just to give you sort of a scope on where to look for talent, and then also keep in mind where your team is at. So if you're looking for a junior developer or a junior designer, make sure that the compensation range that you build out is in line with what's competitive in the marketplace, or the roles and responsibilities that you list on your job description reflects that of the talent pool that you're going after. And in terms of compensation range, a lot of people ask a lot of questions about this. There's a lot of different websites that host these type of ranges. You can go to your government websites, but I find Glassdoor is pretty reflective. A lot of people post their salaries there. Some can be inflated, yes, but it's pretty in line with most tech organizations anyways. And then the fifth thing I have here is the interview process. So the interview process is important to understand from the internal stakeholder capacity. So as I mentioned before, the recruitment process as a whole takes a long time, usually about 8 weeks to find really top talent if you commit yourself to it. And so we want to educate all of the internal stakeholders on what role they play in the interview stages. So are you doing the initial coffee chat meetings where you're educating the candidate on the role, digging into a little bit of their timeline history in terms of work? Or are you going to be a developer who's going to be involved in the process and do a technical deep dive or a portfolio review? And I'll dive in deeper into what types of interviews that we've run or I've run in different scenarios that can give you a better idea of what this looks like later on in the presentation. And finally, where are you going to post these job opportunities? What I like to do is get in the head of the candidate and start thinking about where do they hang out? Are they going to different conferences? Are they contributing to different forums? Are they part of different community groups? And that's where you really want to get your job description put on. So I've looked at different conference websites to post jobs. Ladies Learning Code is a great one in Canada. And General Assembly is an amazing one as well. AngelList, a lot of different startup incubators have a bunch of different job boards, and anywhere on social media. And make sure you use those hashtags. And so the next piece after you finish the intake meeting is posting that job. But if you're looking for a job where specific skills are needed, sometimes you're not going to get those through applicants. And so that's where sourcing and reaching out is the next step in the process. So here's a list of a couple of different sourcing tools. Everything for me in the last little bit has stemmed back to LinkedIn. I know it's kind of that scary social media platform, but it does provide a lot of really great information, and especially if folks use a lot of good keywords in their profile, you're able to find them pretty easily. And so going through the other few here, Facebook, wondering why that's up there. I don't really look into people's personal details. What I use Facebook for is those event invite pages. So if you find a few meetups or hackathons where the Facebook invite page lists the attendees or people who are interested, that's a great place to start in terms of talent. And then from there, I'll either go and look up that name on Twitter or LinkedIn and sort of dive in deeper into their experience, and that is a great place to go. Lanyard, if you're not familiar, is a website where you can go and if you're going to a conference, you can add your name onto the list and say that you're an attendee. It's very similar to the Facebook idea where you can see just guest lists of people who have attended certain meetups around the world, and it's a great place to find those initial names and networks of people in different domains. And it's actually quite search friendly. There's ways that you can go and find front-end development events or even write down to JavaScript in specific languages. And in the bottom left-hand corner, we have the Twitter new look and discovery page. So I do search Twitter sometimes just to see if people are talking about certain hot topics, see a little bit of designs or read some Medium articles that then can connect me to other talented individuals. And then I revert back to LinkedIn to sort of find more details on them. Meetup in the middle at the bottom is very similar to Lanyard. It's just a bit more updated, I find, than Lanyard, and more local talent because you can find those meetups in particular cities and narrow things down from there. And then lastly, going to in real life events. If you have the time or can attend these meetups, go meet people. It's the best opportunity you can to get some face-to-face time, show off your brand, bring business cards, connect with people, or even host your own. If you're feeling like that's something that you can take on the bandwidth to, invite a bunch of people, get the word out on social, and have those meaningful conversations. And continuing on with the tools, these are just a couple that I thought I'd mention because I found that I've had a really great opportunity using them. On the left, we have Intello. Intello is a way to sort of LinkedIn times 10. You can find candidates through there and a lot of their information regarding their social media platforms and also emails. So if you don't want to pay those LinkedIn premium subscriptions, you can go through Intello to actually scrape emails and contact information to reach out to these talented candidates. And then to the right, Calendly. So as I mentioned, again, it's the recruiting process is quite lengthy and you do have to put in some time. And Calendly is just a great way to send out meeting invitations and organize your calendar in terms of when you want to be interviewing and when you want time to actually commit to your work. It's a great scheduling tool, and all you need to do is send your link out to those that you're interested in meeting with. And so reach outs. This is the scariest part and something that I've actually found to be really fun when you're getting into the nitty-gritty of the interview process. These should be short and straight to the point. I mean, when was the last time you have received a reach out that was super long and you knew that it was cut, copied, and pasted and just changed the name and sent to you? Those don't really feel good. So what we like to do is send a short message, getting straight to the point. Think of that elevator pitch that you talked about in your intake meeting and personalize it. Go to their social, check out if they've written a Medium article, and make a little quick comment that you've read it or that you've seen their repos in GitHub, something that just says that you've taken the time to learn about them in some way, shape, or form. And then you can continue on with a little bit of an overview of the big challenges and what this role is going to entail, and then end with a call to action. Now, I'd kind of recommend that this call to action is not necessarily like, hey, come in and interview with us. Start by building that relationship. So offer them a phone call to get to know you better, or even offer, if you're in the same city, to grab a coffee just to discuss the opportunity further. Keep the interview until they're ready and bought into the entire process. And so now we get into the fun meat of the project. So interviewing 101. This is where you've gotten some candidates, you've either reached out to them and they've committed to the interview process, or you have a solid pool of applicants. And so how does this go? Well, one thing to keep in mind before you even get going is the candidate experience side. Now, why is this important? I can go on and on and on about how candidate experience can affect the way you do business, but I'll just go through some of the top points. Your interview should not be a grilling session. This is not an opportunity to just keep going further and further and back this candidate into a corner just to get the information that you want. Try having a casual conversation. Set the standard that you're just trying to learn from them, that they can ask you questions as you go along in the conversation to keep that two-way street open, and it makes them feel more comfortable, and in turn will make them tell you more things that you want to hear. And then pay attention to your own behavior as well. Are you sitting with your arms crossed over your chest? I mean, we can go back to the simple nonverbal behaviors, or even where's your tone at? Are you paying attention? Are you actively listening? Candidates can tell when you're not listening when you ask these non-specific questions or your eye contact isn't there. Be fully engaged in the conversation. This person has taken time out of their day to come and meet with you or jump on a call with you. The least you can do is be present in that conversation. And so the third thing is be timely. And I don't mean just like showing up to the interviews on time from both the candidate and interviewee perspective. I mean in getting back to people, setting up the interviews. Try to give yourself that timeline and say, okay, I'm posting this job description. It's going to come down on this date, and I'll get back to everyone by this date. It just gives you this sense of ownership, and then also makes candidates feel really good when you get back to them. And it's up to you to decide if you're going to get back to everyone or only those that apply. But if you want to be world class, is what we talk about, is it feels really good when you get back and respond to everyone who's applied. They've taken the time to send in an application. You can send them a quick email. You can build out a text expander for that if you really want to, and customize it per each application to just say why it's a no, or why you're moving forward with other folks. It's a really feel-good thing to do. And now I'll dive into sort of the interview styles. I've chosen specifically to zero in on more of the technical style interviews, but during the question period, feel free to ask me about any others that I've done. So the first one is a technical deep dive. And so these are quite fun because you have the opportunity to learn from the candidate. So have them choose a topic from their previous experience, or you can choose one if you've gone through their history and see that they're an expert in some sort of design function. And just start with a very broad start, and then keep asking them open-ended questions like, how did you do that? Or why did you choose to make that decision? And keep going until you stop learning, and then keep going again until they can't go any longer. And so this is a great opportunity to also test how much you know. And then you want to find an expert in that field if you're looking for someone to bring innovation take a project to the next level, you probably want to find someone who knows a little bit more about a subject than you do. And so the other important thing is to check your bias at the door. And what I mean by this is you may have a certain idea of how things need to be done or a particular process in the way that you build or design, but the person that you're interviewing may have a different perspective to that. And so all biases aside, just try to learn from them, and even tailor your questions like, why did you decide to do that? Not in a demeaning way, but more so in a let's discover this together and learn about different ways that people have built things. And then the main point of this interview is to reduce complexity. So can someone take a really complex problem for you and simplify it? And this is really key to the bottom part of the deep dive. So at the deepest point, where you are not sure of the context anymore and it becomes a more complicated problem, can they really clearly communicate this project is really important, because when they're in the organization and you're talking about particular problems when you're working together, you want to make sure that they're able to reiterate that to the rest of the team in a way that everyone can understand. And of course, there's going to be some times where not everyone does understand, but try to reduce that complexity as much as possible. And the next one, paired programming and problem solving. So I looped these two together because if you don't have access to having a pairing hut or the opportunity to program together, the problem solving interview is definitely a great second option. So you can whiteboard the problem or pair on it together. Choose something that is hopefully new to both of you. Have a different interviewer build a problem and the two of you program on it together. This opportunity is a great time to learn if you both can work on a project together, and how they build, and then also how confident they are in their development skills or design skills. Like, can they walk through their experience and their problem verbally with you? Again, reducing that complexity and talking things through clearly, asking lots of questions, just getting that feel of how it would be like to work with them day to day, and also seeing if they can solve the problem correctly. And so then if paired programming is not that option, you can whiteboard out this problem on a whiteboard. So pick a problem together, talk it through, walk it through, ask a bunch of questions to each other, try to have the opportunity to stump each other on some things, and make a game out of it, keep it fun and light. But ultimately, again, you're trying to break down these problems to its core elements, and do they understand their limitations of the solution that they came to with you. And lastly, this is more for the design side of things. If you're looking to hire designers, portfolio reviews are very helpful. Get them to bring in a range of design work. If you're looking for a specific designer, whether it be product or anything else, maybe get their portfolio to bring in some examples of some specific things that you're really looking to, but also a nice array of their work is great to see as well. You can also do this for content projects. I've experimented with this in the last year. Bring in some of your written work, whether it be published on a blog or in a magazine or newspaper or something that you've just written, or give them an activity or to write up a blog skeleton or some sort of content project, and then bring it in and discuss it during the interview. The point of this is obviously to explain their processes and decisions behind their design, and also get them to critique their own work a bit. See if they can really dig in, explain the reason why they design things a certain way, and maybe ask if they could do something differently. What would they do now in hindsight? It's a great opportunity to talk that through. And so the least favorite part for most people are rejections. I can't tell you enough how important it is to actually do these. And so at the beginning, I mentioned when you have the application process and you send those rejection emails, I think it's really important to give people feedback, especially when it's on their skills. I've met so many people in the past year who I've given this feedback to who have come back and said, hey, Kim, I've learned something new. Check out this project. And they've taken that feedback and run with it, and we've brought them back into the process because they are up there with what we had needed in the first place. If the person has come in to meet with you through a bunch of interviews and you've now built a bit of a relationship, give them a phone call. If you decide towards the end of the interview process that they're great, but they're not quite there, and that's just not what we need at the moment, get on the phone, give them that feedback, try to be as specific as possible, and respect that they may have the opportunity to go back, try something, build their skills, and then want to come back again and interview with you. This just ties back into the whole candidate experience, and it reflects on you as a company ultimately. You want to make sure that people have a really good opportunity to interview with you, whether they get the job or not, because ultimately they're going to tell their friends that they interviewed there and what their experience was like, and you don't really want to have that bad reputation of poor candidate experience. And fun part, making the offer. And so there's a couple of important things when you're going to make the offer, and some of those should be thought about before you actually make the call. So you want to get down to business and figure out every specific detail. Whether you're fortunate enough to have the HR department work with you on that, or you're doing this yourself, get down to the nitty-gritty in regards to salary. You can probably figure this stuff out earlier in the process in terms of the interview when you're having some initial coffee chats and sort of ask, where are you expecting to be around? Is there a certain range that we can play with? That way, when you get to this offer stage, that you may not have to get into the whole negotiation phase. Do you offer benefits and perks? And if so, what do those look like? Make sure you can explain those things thoroughly before you get on the phone. And then it's also quite nice to go through an onboarding plan. If you're a company of one, will you be doing the onboarding? Do you have handover documents? Do you have a plan to have them shadow? What does that look like? I think it's really awesome when companies take the time to explain what their onboarding plan looks like, so that everyone is in line when they show up on day one, they know what's expected of them. If you don't have an onboarding plan and you just are filling a role where someone's left before, make sure that everything's cleaned up and take the time to write up some handover documents that on day one this person can start and have an amazing experience. And so when you've figured out all those details, make the call, go through everything, and if it all sounds good, then make sure that contract's drawn up and send it out. And there you go. And so to wrap things up here, in terms of content, I just wanted to go through a couple of key learnings and things that I think are the most important when you're running a recruitment process. So forecasting a growth plan is super important. So, I mean, there's been a lot of context that I've covered here in the last little bit, and it's important to go at sky level view from the beginning and say, okay, cool, this is what we want to accomplish this year. Can we break it down into quarters? Or if you even want to break it down further than that, go for it. And of course, things change, right? Like you could get further in a project than you thought and need more people quickly, or you could be a little bit slower at things and need to push back recruitment just because you don't have time to fully commit to that process. Having a skeleton is really going to be helpful. The second thing is building context on the role before actually starting the search. Whether it's getting all internal stakeholders on board and understanding exactly what you're looking for, or even just for yourself as the hiring manager. You don't want to get halfway through a search and have spent a bunch of time meeting with people and realize that you don't know what you're actually looking for. So really take the time to sit down and iron out those details. And lastly, the interviewing and candidate experience. Choose your interview styles very carefully. I can't stress this enough. in the intake meeting, decide exactly what information you want to pull from a candidate in each interview, and that's how you can plan out which style you want to use, or how the process is going to work from beginning to end. And then again, candidate experience. If you want people to come back, or you want to get a lot in your applicant pool of quality candidates whose friends have referred them to interview with you and join your company, make sure that's pretty polished and exciting and fun. And so now I'll turn it over to the Q&A period. So I'd love to hear any of your questions or things that you're wondering about at this point. Okay, so the first question is, are there any tech interview tips for assessing skills for more administrative positions like account or project managers, sales, etc.? Yeah, definitely. So what I like to do is give folks the opportunity to do a little bit of an activity before they come in to interview with me. And so I've tried this in the past with a lot of our content roles. And so what I do is build out some sort of skeleton and say, okay, for project management, for example, give them a scenario and say like, okay, well, I want you to explain to me or describe to me how you would set up this scenario. What would you build, or what kind of resources you would need? Test their scrappiness or their organizational skills in that little activity. And then when they come in for the interview, you can go through that activity together. Are they able to explain their decisions clearly? It's very similar to the design or portfolio review. And then are they able to critique their own work? So if that doesn't necessarily work in your scenario, what can you do to reevaluate that or talk that problem through to get them to the answer that you were hoping for? In terms of sales, sales is a harder one. It depends on what you really want them to do. Are they outbound sales? Are they inbound? Maybe start by asking them on the job description, hey, if you were to go out and look for potential reach outs that we could do to sell to, give me the 3 names of those companies and why you chose them. That's something that's been successful for us here at Shopify. So it shows that people have taken the time to understand your business and then also learn that they've done their research. Barisha asks, are there any tips for phone interviews? Yeah, phone interviews can be tough because you're not seeing the body language or behaviors that usually give you an indication of how the interview is going. But I like to really dig into, especially if they're an applicant, why your company, why make the move, why apply to this particular position, and dig into what are the problems they're looking to solve in their career. It's one thing to just say like, okay, well, I want to move on for this opportunity because I want a new management level position. But when you start digging into like purpose and why you want to be at a certain company, there's usually some problems that you can dig into and figure out what they want to do. And Paul asks, are there any tips for searching in LinkedIn? Yeah. We have experimented a lot with Boolean searches, and so figuring out are there typical names, are there typical names for the role that you're looking for? So software engineer versus software developer, or front-end developer, Fed, figuring out all the keywords that you need to, putting them in and making sure you use the proper quotations and ampersands to include all the keywords that you're looking to find. The new LinkedIn is a little bit trickier to use, but in that advanced search bucket, you can also include location, company names, and so on and so forth. I'd recommend, if you're going to be serious with the LinkedIn searching, going and getting some business plus or buying some in-mails, because you're probably going to be reaching out to folks on LinkedIn that are not your connections, and then you'll need to use in-mails to do those reach outs. And the next one here is from Sam. Are there any tips for hiring my first employee? This is a good one. I think the intake meeting then is going to be a little bit different for you. This is going to be a bit of self-reflection. Are you looking for a business partner, or are you looking for an employee? Really ironing out what that looks like at the beginning. Are you looking to build some sort of culture or a way that you want to go about your business? What is this first person going to be doing? Are they a developer? Are they a designer? Are they someone who can wear multiple hats? In that case, if you're looking for that, I actually joined a company a few years ago before Shopify, where I was employee number 2. And essentially they posted on all of these startup incubator pages to find these employees, because it's just, you're looking for someone who wants to do a bunch of different things and has not necessarily a T-shaped experience, so an expert in one things, but has experience doing a lot of things. You kind of want a Jack or Jill of all trades. Okay, and the next question is, I read suggestions about surveying candidates to get feedback and encouraging candidates to review the interview process on Glassdoor. Would you recommend that? And if so, what should we be aware of? The first thing that comes to mind when I think about that is a lot of people have a lot of opinions, and you're not going to be able to please everyone. But at the same time, like, the more information that's out there about you, the more people are going to be able to find you. I would encourage it. We encourage people to give us comments on Glassdoor because it's also a little bit of a feedback loop for us. We can go in and some of the more negative feedback we can take back and say, hey, is this something on our end that we can change and make better and more inclusive for everyone? And then obviously the good stuff is great to know that you're doing a good job. But just to keep in mind for your own sake that, I mean, people are going to write mean things about you regardless of if you're doing a good job or not. And so to really take that with stride and make adjustments where you need to. Okay, great. So that's all the questions that we have. Oh, sorry, there's one more from Paolo. What are some ways that you'd suggest to communicate company culture? This is a tricky one, for sure. Company culture is something that I think should be really thought out before you really communicate it externally. You want to think about culture that can transcend a number of different people from different groups and backgrounds. And so I like to think about it as values alignment, right? You want to find a way where the way you communicate and work at work is something that anyone from any education background or walk of life can sit down and work together, but is unique to your company. So just as I'm saying that sounds really complicated, and it is. So be careful before communicating that externally before you know that it is something that you can validate and back up. Okay, great. So that was our last question. Thanks again, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.